Good evening, everyone. Happy Sabbath, and welcome to this evening's NEC Young Couples program. So, my name is Chido, and this is my husband Nigel. And we have a very exciting program for you today entitled What They Don't Tell You About Marriage. And it's going to be led by our very own Juliet Sweeney. So, we're very excited about that. And before we go there, babe, I wanted to ask you if there is one thing you'd say that no one ever told you about marriage, what would it be?
I think being a person who appreciates the love language of physical touch. Um, they're always saying wait for, till you get married, no sex before marriage. And then they say, you're going to have as much sex as you want when you get married. And then you get married, and then that's not the case, which is cool, but no one ever tells you about that.
No one ever tells you it's not going to be every day.
Yeah, that's true.
I think on my side, one thing that they never told me about marriage is how when you share a life with someone, like you really do share everything, like you share it all. So, for example, no joke, in our marriage, we literally, and this is probably like oversharing, but we literally give a daily update on bowel movements. And it's like bowel talk is the new pillow talk, right? In our marriage. And it's totally hilarious, but I love it. And it keeps the romance alive. And I mean, let's be honest, if you're not talking about poop, then are you really married? Like, are you really married if you're not talking about it? So I'm so excited to hear from our speaker. And before we invite her to speak and ask her a couple of questions and hear about who she is and where she's from, let's open the program and acknowledge God's presence with a word of prayer. So let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this evening. Thank you for the wonderful program that you've put together. And we're excited to learn about those things that are not often talked about when considering marriage. And Lord, I pray that you be with our speaker, that you speak through her and use her to bless us, to educate us, to teach us, and to better prepare those of us who are contemplating marriage, and also to bless those who are already in marriage and maybe navigating some of the things that she'll be speaking about. I pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. So, our speaker today, again, as we said, is Juliet Sweeney, and she's a wife, she's a mom, and she's been a professional writer for more than 6 years. And soon she'll be completing a master's in counseling and psychotherapy. And she's a writer and the author of a book called Failing in Love: How Failed Relationships Can Lead to Love at its finest. She's also the co-founder, or she was the founder of Pen Therapy, where she offers online well-being journaling sessions, as well as the mind behind Really Married blog, which is a ministry that gives marriage advice for real life, and it's packed with thought-provoking and interactive content.
Juliet, is there anything that you don't do? Like, it's a lot.
When you list it like that, it's like I don't sleep. But yeah, I do. I keep myself busy.
Definitely, and we're excited to hear from you. I mean, Nigel really spoke about all of your accolades, but do tell us a bit about yourself, where you are in the country, what you do from day to day.
Yeah, so I'm based in Leicester. Day to day at the moment, I work. So I do events and communications for a literacy organisation. But once I start uni, that will be my core focus. So then go into the field of therapy, and hopefully my goal is to become a couples therapist but specialise in sex therapy. So yeah, so day to day, what do I do on my day to day basis other than being kept busy as a mum? I'm also learning Spanish at the moment, which I really love. Such a beautiful language, and I like to, I guess, cook in my spare time, experiment with new recipes. And yeah, just I'd always try to have just some downtime as well. So even if it's just doing something that makes me laugh, you know, trying to just make sure I'm mixing things that just keep it light, because I think sometimes you can just get so into adulting that you forget to just switch off, and just be and just enjoy. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
I love that. I love that. Well, the floor is yours, and we're excited to hear your message today.
Thank you so much, guys. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen with you all. There we go. Yeah. Okay, so what they don't tell you about marriage. I chose this title for the presentation because initially I was trying to decide what to share with you all, and I thought it would be great to, you know, there's so many juicy aspects, you could say, that make up marriage, and it was hard to just pick one area, especially with this being my first time sharing for the Young Married Couples Ministries. So I thought, I know what I'll do is I'll just pick out 5 key areas to hopefully just plant those seeds of discussion and encourage you to get you talking. And what they don't tell you about marriage, when that came to mind, God just gave me that title, and I was like, yes, that's it, because there's conversations that we just don't have in church, conversations we don't have with our parents, conversations we don't have with our spouse or each other or our potential partners, or even conversations we don't have with ourselves. And the more that we aren't having these conversations is the more damage it's actually doing to us in the long term. So my goal with this presentation is that this will be a chance for you to ask yourself the questions, and maybe even find the answers to questions that you maybe haven't really known where to get that information from, and just pique that curiosity within you. I'd say that's so key with this topic. Anything to do with relationships, be curious. You know, the more questions you have, the more willingness you have to do the digging and find the information. And my hope is that through this presentation, you'll just be challenged to look at relationships very differently, and consider the areas that we're not talking about, and create a forum where we can actually have the conversations that we need to have. So we're going to dive in. Before we do, I'm just going to say a quick word of prayer. Heavenly Father, as I now present, I pray that my words that are shared will be from your heart to mine. I pray, Lord, that those listening, whether they're in relationships, whether they're married, whether they're single, whatever stage they are at, this will be a presentation that will touch them personally, that will help them to understand that these are important conversations. Even though, yes, we may make them taboo, we need to strip that back and allow these conversations to be heard, to be had, for the sake of healthier, happier marriages. So speak through me now, I pray, in Jesus' name. Okay, so I just want to give you a quick introduction. I know I did share a little bit just then when Chido and Nigel were asking, but I think it's good for you to see the person that's sharing with you, and why this area is so key for me. So yeah, a little bit about me there. I'm 29 years old, married for 4 years. We have a 2-year-old daughter. A picture of me and Liam there, but I'll squeeze that in. A bit of cheese for you all. So my book, I've just included the cover there, is available on Amazon. Failing in Love, How Failed Relationships Can Lead to Love at Its Finest. And this was published, I think, 2 years ago now. And the book is very interactive. It includes questions at the end of each chapter, you could use them for journaling, you could just use them to discuss with your partner, or as I say, yourself. Go check it out. I also run pen therapy, as was mentioned, online wellbeing journaling classes. I graduated from Peace in 2014. So for those, most of you listening as NECyouth should know what Peace is. For those who don't, it's the practical evangelism and Christian education. To think there, Craig, don't hurt me. Yeah, so that's the School of Evangelism that NEC runs, and yeah, it was truly a privilege, and was my first taste of counselling, actually. So it's so nice to be where I am now and actually going down that route. Also have a diploma in art and design. My degree is in creative writing. I'm just all-round creative. That's how I describe myself. And then, yeah, so my master's will be, God willing, in counselling and psychotherapy, specialising with in sex therapy and helping couples just generally with relationships and marriage. So that's a bit about me. In terms of Really Married, because you would have seen the first slide, it said presented by Really Married. So for those of you that don't know, currently have a page on Instagram. We have been a little bit quiet recently, but I have a lot planned, especially over the time that I'll be at uni, to start kicking up the content again. But before it went quiet, there was a lot that I was doing in terms of featuring couples. That was such a joy to some of you listening, may have even been featured. And it's always just been a pleasure to hear people's personal experiences and include you all as part of this platform. But essentially, Really Married is a platform where I share marriage advice for real life. A lot of it is based upon personal experience. I use the line vulnerability is key, and also marriage without the mask. The topics that I include on the website include, there's a little screenshot there for you to see, but topics include communication, priorities, parenting, finances, love and sex. And all the blog posts, I love to ask questions. So as with the book, it's also all on the blog. It's very interactive at the end of every blog post to challenge you, to ask you the questions that you need to be asking, and to encourage your own self-exploration with everything to do with relationships. So just very quickly, Really Married was actually inspired by my own journey. I was going through a difficult time, or we were going through a difficult time in our marriage. And it was a time where, you know, you question, well, should we even be going through these things? We've been married, been married a couple of years, and all these stigmas and expectations that you don't even necessarily know where they come from. These are the very things that can keep you stuck and inactive, you know, in terms of finding help. And sadly, there are so many people that stay in that place of feeling helpless, and years down the line, their marriage unfortunately has suffered because they haven't received the help. They haven't gone out and actually uncovered why are we experiencing these issues and allowed themselves to be vulnerable. And it's not easy by any means, but speaking from experience, going on that journey and starting to work through our stuff was key. And it was actually the birth of Really Married, because at that time, while I was going through the heat of things, God inspired me to actually start writing. And I remember saying to God, like, really, now? This is the time that you want me to start ministering in this way and reaching out to other couples, when I myself, I don't feel like I'm even at a place to do that. And God just showed me that I want to use you where you're at now. I don't want you to be at a point of perfection. I don't want you to be that person who feels like my marriage has to be perfect. I just want you for you, and your vulnerability right now and the realness of what you're experiencing is going to be the main ingredient for what I'm going to do for you through you with this ministry. So my agreement with God is basically, okay, God, if you give me the words, I'll do the writing. And ever since, every time I sat down to write a blog, it's just flowed. Like, I've never found that I'm stuck for words or what to say. Everything just comes out, and I try to keep it real. I try to just be, because I believe that that's something that we struggle with in this area, is actually being vulnerable, actually being real, which is why I couldn't have a ministry called Really Married and not be real. So that's just a little bit behind the ministry itself. So why get married in the first place? I don't know about you, but growing up in church, it was like it was always in the back of your mind, you know, when you have conversations or relationships retreats or whatever it might be. I think because of the fact that there's conversations that aren't being had, all you would hear is, that's for marriage. Yeah, when you get married, you know, you can't talk about that now, but when you're married. And it was just that kind of, without even intending it to be, often a goal that's in your mind that, okay, I just need to find someone, settle down, get married. I'm getting to this age, I need to settle down, get married, you know. And here are some of the reasons why people do get married, some you know, questionable compared to others, but I just thought I'd list from just general, you know, research out there. These are the reasons why people actually choose to settle down and get into relationships. And so what I'm about to share, these 5 main areas that I hope will, as I say, trigger your thinking and your attitudes towards marriage. Whether you are married right now, whether you are not married, like, this presentation is for everyone and anyone. You know, it's not for those, yes, there's questions in there that you can ask your spouse, but there are also questions you can ask yourself. You know, they're questions you can ask your boyfriend or your girlfriend. They're questions you can ask your partner. It's just key to get these conversations going in the first place. So what you will find is at the end of each section that we'll be covering, there are interactive questions. So I would encourage you to come back, watch this presentation back again. It will be recorded on YouTube, and pause at the parts where you will see there's actual questions and just go through them. So I try to do it in this way so that this can actually be a resource for you to come back and refer to. And a lot of what's included is actually, I just stole from my blog and kind of turned it into presentation format. So you can also go on the blog and find out more that you can get your teeth, sink your teeth into if you like this experience today. So number one, your finances are foundational. Before I got into a relationship, me and my finances, maybe I should stop there. But I didn't have the kind of relationship with money where I was future minded. You know, I remember working for working in retail at one point, and my discount for where I was working was 50% off, and pretty much my pay would come in and it would go out again. Like my money, they would give me the money, I'd give it back to them. You know, my wardrobe would be full of things that I hadn't even worn. And I just, you know, I thought, if I can afford it, I'll get it. It was never a thought of, I never had that mindset of let me kind of save or put aside, or just because I want it doesn't mean I need it, or there was no thought behind that. So, all I was thinking about was in that moment, this is what I want. So when you meet someone now and you come to try to work with someone, try to understand how do we navigate life together, from early on, not even when you're married, from early on, it's recognizing that other person's spending habits and understanding like how do they manage their money, what is their attitude towards money, what particular things are they struggling with, and how do we work together when it comes to finances. Do we have a shared attitude, or do our opinions clash? So just some of the questions that I noted down. How would I feel if my partner had earned more than me? Would it work for us to solely use joint bank accounts? What is the benefit of having our own bank accounts? Do I prioritize saving as much as my spouse? Are we on the same page about our current finances? So when you're married and you're actually going through, as I say, these are questions that should be happening well before anyway, but when you're married, finances underpin so much, and finance is actually the top reason that people do choose to get divorced and go through divorce. But it underpins so much in terms of your day-to-day living, you know, in terms of what you can and can't afford, in terms of what you then go on to do. I mean, if one of you is working, another one wants to, like in our circumstances, I'm going to be going back to study, and my husband will be working, and so we have to work out, okay, how are we going to make this work? How is this feasible? Having a child, how are we going to, you know, budget on a month-to-month basis to make sure she has everything she needs? Your food budget, and when you don't have any kind of system in place, it's hard. I mean, it's hard enough having it in place and sticking to it. And for me personally, I'll say it's been a journey, but I'm so glad I am where I am now, because I have a lot more appreciation and respect for finances and what that actually brings to our marriage. You know, it actually changes our dynamic when we're building financial stability. So it's so important to have these conversations and talk about, even if it's hard, like dealing with debt is hard. I'm talking from experience. And when I had to have that conversation with Liam, it was horrible. You know, I didn't want to. It's vulnerable, and you don't want to feel like you are a dead weight to the person you're with. You're bringing them issues, but in reality, this is going to affect them whether you like it or not. Not talking about it isn't going to just make it go away. So a quote from my blog is, if the mentality was our money over my money, then it wouldn't matter who was earning more anyway. And that's from one of my blog posts, my money versus our money. And this has been a huge lesson, and just changes everything, you know, because when you're kind of saying, okay, and it's not, and I'll say, this isn't to say that you can't have your account or his account and where you manage, and a joint account to manage certain bills together. That's not to say that can't happen, but the overall goal should be our goals are shared. You know, we're both putting into the pot. What are we doing to manage our finances collectively? So financial goals. So I've put financial compatibility and financial stability. So financial compatibility is to work together effectively and honestly while you manage your money. To be able to compromise to build a foundation where both spouses feel equally respected, regardless of either financial position. So if, for example, you are not working right now and your partner is, or you're maybe the one that's staying home looking after the kids, or, you know, whatever your dynamic is, how you're able to build a foundation together without someone feeling that they're not contributing or that they're less than. And to fairly consider both perspectives and opinions to decide the most effective way to move forward together. I can't stress that enough. It has to be that you're moving forward together. If someone is less, you know, less financially literate, it's how you go on that journey to understand. I mean, if I decided I'm just going to spend, it doesn't matter, you know, I'm just going to get what I want to get. This is me. I'm doing it at the destruction of, you know, my financial stability and our shared financial stability. So I had to get to a point where I would say mine and Liam's case, I was definitely more the spender, he's more the saver. We had to meet in the middle to find ways that where I was taking budgeting seriously, and for him, he was able to let loose sometimes and decide, okay, yeah, let's spend, let's do this, or let's. And so it's definitely that give and take and finding ways to manage together. So financial stability, to manage comfortably on a month-to-month basis without struggling from one payday to the next. Some people sadly are in that position where they are working to live. And that's never the goal. You know, the goal is to get to a point where you have enough, you have your rainy day fund behind you. So if anything comes up unexpected, you know that you have a pot to dip into without it causing additional stress. Yeah, so as mentioned there, have sufficient funds for a rainy day, consistent saving structure, to not be in a position where debt becomes a restriction. Because I wouldn't say, you know, debt comes in different forms, and sometimes debt is something that is required in whatever aspect you're going to be, but as long as it's affordable, as long as it's manageable, and as long as it's not something that, as I say, is actually restricting you financially. So it's really important to consider this before you do get married, because it's huge. It is huge. So until you learn to live within your means and become a true steward of your money, it will never feel like you have enough to live an affordable life. Again, this is an important point to consider, because a lot of people fall into that trap of thinking, if only I had more, if only I had the, you know, the job, if only I got the promotion, if only I got the higher salary, if only I got, you know, and they don't then look at their current mindset towards money and think, okay, but at the moment, yes, have your goals, have your aspirations, have your career path that you want to climb and build on. But what is your attitude right now towards money? Because if your attitude right now isn't that you're managing your finances effectively, that won't change when you have more money. If anything, it will just get worse. So this is a really important area of your marriage that needs consideration and needs exploration. So if you've never done this before, this I found was a really good tip, is plan for a money date. So you decide on the frequency. It's time for you to just openly talk about your finances. Same way, you know, you'd set date night in the week and spend time together. You can have a day where it's just set to look at your finances, share any concerns, talk about anything you might want to do differently, share the things that maybe aren't going so well, and talk about how you can build on the health of your current financial situation. And I think it's important to also say to approach this with sensitivity, not to come with judgment, because often if this area isn't handled well, you'll just shut down and you won't find that you can move. You'll just be stuck in this cycle of, you know, butting heads. And like, it has to be that, okay, if you have a month where you spent a bit more over budget, let's look at ways where we can maybe rein that in the next month. As long as the intention is to do better and to do better together, you'll find that this will be an area of marriage that will be a lot less threatening, and a lot more exciting as to what you can achieve together financially and be stewards together of your money. Is it any wonder why finances are one of the top reasons for divorce, when we realize how much the ability to manage and balance what we have determines so much of the way we're able to live our lives on a daily basis? So at this point, as I mentioned initially, you can come back, pause and explore, and here's some questions for you to dig into this a bit more. So finances can be a touchy topic if conversations aren't being had. So try to begin with the basics rather than jumping at the deep end with potentially triggering questions. The following sentence starters will hopefully help you and your spouse to start opening up about your finances, maybe even during your first money date. So number 1, when I think about my financial education, I think about. 2, when I think about your contribution to our finances, I feel. 3, in our marriage, the thought of dealing with finances makes me feel. 4, if I could change one thing about our finances right now, it would be. And then 5, in future, I would like us both to be financially. Okay, so number 2. Sex is far from simple. And Nigel touched on this, alluded to this area when we were doing our introduction. And yeah, it's not. Like, whatever you think you know, throw that away. It's really not as simple as we're gonna, just have this incredible time just because that's what happens in marriage. It really is not that at all. I've made a list of some questions, just touching on, I actually shared these questions. If you haven't listened already, 100% recommend go and listen to Sexpectations, Let's Be Real Sexpectations. It was a panel that I was a part of on Thursday evening with a ministry called thecommonroom.hub. They're on YouTube. And we broke this down, the idea of sex and what are our actual expectations towards it. And there's so much there. It's an hour or so of us just digging specifically on this topic. So go and check it out. But I'll touch on it briefly here. So see, these are some of the questions. So what does sex feel like for the first time? And all different, what different methods? What if I'm not ready? What if my spouse has already had sex? What contraceptive options? And these are such important questions to have in mind long before you're married, and to have an understanding before you're married. This will be, God willing, my area of specialism, and the reason why I love talking about it, and I'm still learning so much. Obviously, I'm on my journey too, but it's the fact that we just don't have questions about something that a desire God has given us, that something is so normal to us in our humanity, and we just suppress it to the point where we a lot of us, we pretty much self-destruct in terms of it's like having an appetite food-wise, and you're just saying constantly, I will not eat, I will not eat, I will not eat. Like, understand your diet and what makes you feel particular ways, and how this is actually impacting your body, and how this is, affecting you in the long term, and how we have zero education in this area. And then we expect we're going to get married, and then we're just going to say hello, and then we'll just know exactly what to do and how to do it. It's baffling. And so the more we can actually decide, no, we're going to talk about this, we're going to have these conversations. And as I say, this goes just as much for those who are married as those that aren't, because you'd be amazed how many married people aren't talking about sex, even though they're married. So many married people that aren't having sex, even though they're married. And the conversations that aren't being had before are the very conversations that, as I say, lead to the destruction of sex within marriage. Because by not talking about it, it doesn't go away. It doesn't make it any better for us. And we walk around with traumas. We walk around with, misconceptions. We walk around with addictions. We walk around with all of these things. We come together, we get married, and then we're like, whoa, now we have to try and figure this out together. It's far from simple. So this is from a blog post. Go and find out more, the truth about orgasms, on Really Married. Only 1/3 of women orgasm from just having penetrative sex. And I share this to say that this is just one piece of information, and already that just blows our understanding wide open in terms of what we do not know. and what we need to know when it comes to this whole area of sex. So normalize conversations. Like, I can't stress this enough. Communication is everything. You can't expect to have a healthy experience with one another if you're not communicating in the first place, if you're not even saying the word in the first place. The more you can educate yourself and hear healthy perspectives, is the more comfortable you will then feel. I wasn't always comfortable talking about this. You know, my parents didn't have any conversations with me about me to do with sex. I didn't have anything. Basically, I was going off of kind of the little that I maybe got from conversations around me, but the majority was from outside, like everyone else, like what I was seeing on TV, where I was hearing people say what my friends were saying outside of church. Well, you know, and it's amazing because church should be the hub, you know, from what sex is and what it was created to be. Church should be the heart of sexual conversations. And if we don't have those conversations within church, we're still going to learn just from the wrong places. Regardless, we're going to learn. So I would much rather we have these conversations, we start to normalize these conversations. So we're learning from the right places. We're learning from how God has intended sex to be experienced. And we're working to build our marriages into what they should be. So the aim is to talk about sex same way you would any other part of your marriage. What are you happy or unhappy with? What questions do you have? What might you like to start trying together? From food to finances, sex belongs right there as one of your go-to topics. Great piece of advice I learned along the way, if you're doing research, is just to have conversations about sex outside of the bedroom, the same way you would anything else, to help normalize the conversations, to take the shame out of it. A lot of us carry so much shame in this area. And if it means that you need to go through your own journey of counselling to work through any particular issues, because often it does take that with deep-rooted issues, accept that and look at ways where you can get the help that you need. Because if it is in favour of your marriage and with the potential that you will experience a happier, healthier marriage for it, it's work, but it's a journey worth going down if it's going to be for the benefit of your marriage. There's a reason Adam was attracted to Eve when he saw her, and in that moment his attraction had little to do with her personality. A marriage needs sexual attraction. Yeah, I'll leave that one with you for a moment. But yeah, so sexual intimacy goals. So let's stop shaming physical desires. Let's stop minimizing our needs for sexual attraction, and let's instead start building on what we have. And let's start actively working towards a sexual connection that beautifully exceeds what we need. For those of us who are married, especially, talking to all of you couples out there, we shouldn't feel ashamed by our mistakes or the fact that we're still learning about sex, even if we are decades into married life. And I gave this example whilst I did the talk I mentioned with the Common Room on sex expectations, is the fact that I'm nearly 30 years of age, and it's only in the past few years that I've started to actually go on this journey to understand what sex should be, how it's impacting my marriage, how the areas we need to work on to build on. And you know, I'm nearly 30 and it's taken all this, you know, this amount of time. And yes, I'm glad I am where I am now and that I'm continuing on the journey that I'm on. But there's so many people that are my age and older and still not having these conversations. And that's scary, because this is such an important area for any relationship. And it will affect you, as I say, whether you talk about it or you don't, it will affect you. So let's start creating spaces for these kind of conversations, because if not, it will be something, unfortunately, that will be more damaging and cause more harm towards what our marriages could and should be. So again, this is a point where you can pause and explore when going back over this presentation. But if you're yet to have an open conversation with your spouse about your sex life, sharing these truths can be a good conversation starter. There are so many misconceptions that we pick up along the way in life, me included, that stem from a lack of honest conversations on all things to do with sex. If we don't learn from the right places, then we will still learn from somewhere. And the following can hopefully help you start normalizing this topic. So 1, before we got married, I believed that sex was. 2, now that we are married, I understand sex to be. 3, when we have sex, I feel. 4, next time we have sex, I would like. And 5, in future, I hope our sexual connection will be. Three, parenting is a constant priority. Constant. Constant. Yeah, I mean, you hear people say, oh, you know, when you become parent, enjoy your freedom while you can, enjoy. And the reason why I've termed it constant priority is because of the fact that it's not to say that it's a burden. It's not to say that you don't have a life anymore, but it's to say that that's something, once you have that child, that it changes the dynamic of your marriage. Yes, your marriage, it should be the foundation of your home, and that's super important. But when you have that child, it's how you then navigate life together with that child in mind. You know, how you care for them every single day, how you see to their needs, and it's very easy to see how that shift happens when people have children, and then marriage is worse for it. Because if you don't make it, if you're not even making it intentional at the moment, making your marriage an intentional part of your day-to-day to make sure you're building and checking in and assessing and protecting, putting in the work, basically. If that's not something you're doing now, when you have a child, that's something else and someone else that requires your attention and your time and your commitment. And unfortunately, what often happens is, even though your marriage should be here and you're as parents together, you know, you're raising the child and you are a shelter, your marriage is that shelter to then raise that child within the home. What often happens is the marriage starts to drop and lower and lower and lower and lower until you're just about kind of, you know, meeting in the middle, if that, to try and deliver for what that child needs. So it's so important to recognize that when that child comes along, our marriage will change. And it's not an if, it will. But it's what we do together, how we come together as a team, how we maintain what we have as parents, that is important to keep in mind. So this is a quote from Amy Zworski, who's a therapist, but she says that parenting is not only about logic, it's also about being human, making mistakes and learning from them. It's about loving your child so much that you spend time thinking about the ripple effects that your parenting behaviors can have on your child years into the future, and hoping that you're making the right choice in the moment. And I love where she says it's about being human, because as much as you want to be that example for your child, and you're, of course, you're prioritizing them, you want the best for them, the best thing you can do for them is show them that you're human, because they're human too. And along the way, it's how you balance that idea of being the example to them. Like the way that I put it, the way that I could put it best in terms of my own words was that even though I am there to teach my daughter, through teaching her, she's also teaching me. And I think that's the beauty of when you are aware of what your child is actually bringing to your life and what they're adding. It's having the humility to recognize the teachable moments that they are offering you. We don't know it all, you know, regardless of how long you've been a parent, you don't know it all. You never will know it all. But that's not something that should be discouraging. It's recognizing that this journey is one that is here to teach me. And as much as every day I'm being challenged in new ways, that's the life of a parent. Recognizing and embracing that beforehand, before you go on this journey together, before you decide to commit to have children, having that in mind will help you to then go through that adjustment period. And of course, there's certain things that you can never really fully prepare yourself for, because it's experience in becoming a parent. But it's being open-minded enough to recognize that our priorities will shift to include this extra person, and how will that look? How will we navigate that together? So we need to be careful not to overlook our spouse, as the relationship you have with one another will ultimately form the foundation of your child's own sense of stability, whether healthy or unstable. And that's huge. You know, when I recognize that, it's the fact that your child is always watching you. They're watching the dynamic that you have between you as mom and dad. They're learning from you. You are the first example of love and relationships, and they are soaking every moment in, you know, and it's amazing, like the beauty of how children develop. But also, speaking from experience, coming from a home that was very, you know, very rocky, that impacted me, as I'm sure a lot of you listening can also relate. Coming from a home where unfortunately you didn't have that healthy example, it shapes you and it stays with you, and it's something that you have to work through and understand. You didn't choose to have the home life that you did. You didn't choose to see the things you did or have the experiences you had, but it's what you do now that matters most. It's what you do with that experience and how you decide to start unlearning certain things, because realistically we don't choose our baggage. Some of us do things that add to that baggage, but when we come from particular homes as children, we have no control over how we are raised. And so it's important to recognize that that baggage is there, but we also have the choice. We have the ability to take that baggage and turn it into, and unload it, look through it, deal with the hard stuff, and start afresh. But that takes work and an intentional effort. If you're willing to do that, it can be so transformative to your life and hopefully the lives of generations to come through you. Checking your priorities. As a parent, this is really important. Recognizing when you're feeling overwhelmed. And so this is something that I've done and would recommend. I created this as just a way to check in with yourself and to reprioritize, especially when you're juggling so much. I mean, as a parent, when you're working, when you're doing ministries or projects, or, you know, whether it's even just social time, and it can feel sometimes like there's just not enough time in a day. So just a recommendation here, practical tips: make a list of the things you typically find yourself doing each day, whatever that looks like. Make a list of the things that are important to you. And then so make a list of the important to you, and this may take a little while, but it's not really a question that you stop and ask yourself. And then compare those lists. So the things that you typically do compared to the things that are important to you. And you'll find it quite interesting to see that often the things that are important to us don't really show up as much. I mean, this may be the case for you, it may not, but if you're already finding that balance, great. Try and find ways to really hone into that more. If you find a list differ a lot, look at ways that you can try to build on the important list, as I put there, to make it more of an integral part of your day-to-day list. And I think this, well, from my experience, doing this has helped me to actually find more balance that adds to my sense of wholeness and well-being, because it can be difficult as a parent when you're giving so much that you get to the point where you feel like you're just pouring and pouring, emptying and emptying, and then, you know, you're just about, there's just about enough left at the end of the day for you to give to your partner. But actually checking in with what is important to you, what matters to you too, because you are just as important, will help you on your journey and how you balance being a parent. There are so many contributing factors that form even subconscious expectations of what it means to be a spouse and a parent. And this is why it is so important to try and address any trauma that you may be carrying from your childhood, because it will show up in your marriage. And I touched on this because, as I said, it's not a matter of if, it's when. And sometimes it's scary when you actually see these things showing up, and you might feel like, oh, I don't know what to do here, or you know, maybe almost just saying, well, this is me, you know, take it or leave it. But in reality, this is stuff that we need to look at and deal with, because the last thing you want is for this to be a generational cycle, because often it is. Sadly, these things are carried from one generation to the next without people talking. I mean, sex is a perfect example of that. One generation doesn't talk, then the next doesn't talk, and the next doesn't talk, and here we are. So there has to come a point where you stop and say, actually, no, something needs to be done about this. I need to do something differently, and to seek the help you need to be able to do that. Parenting priorities. So personal, looking after your needs, scheduling in me time, allowing yourself to be human, and to not be afraid to ask for help. The bottom one, the last one, don't be afraid to ask for help. From experience, that was super hard, especially when Anaya was newborn. And I just felt like I should just get this, you know, how come everyone else around me seems to be managing just fine? And it took a lot in me to be able to actually step back and accept help when it was offered, if I was feeling tired, or to feel like actually I need to find out how to, you know, navigate this, and to find and to seek guidance. And it's the best thing that you can do is be open and recognize when you need that help, because it will only help you to be a better parent and ensure that the health of your child in the long run. Don't be afraid to say, I need help. And then shared priorities between you and your spouse, caring for your child or children, making time for vulnerability, supporting each other as parents, and also just, you know, loosening up, laughing together. It should be fun, you know, it should be a journey that you're enjoying together. It shouldn't just be task, this, you know, and tick, 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 tick. It should be, let's enjoy life together and make this a home where it will be a joy to raise our child together. So quality time with your spouse, quality time for your children, quality time for yourself. These are the 3 areas that should always sit at the top of your to-do list for each and every day. Quality time with your spouse, quality time with your children, quality time for yourself. So another chance to pause and explore these questions, whether you're trying for a baby, currently expecting, a new parent, or been a parent for a while. Here are some questions you can ask yourself. Am I being kind to myself during this journey? If not, how can I improve this? 2, am I being kind to my spouse during this journey of parenthood? If not, how can I improve this? And number 3, what is one of the most important qualities that I want to instill in my child? Do my spouse and I share this quality? If not, how can we improve this? That's super important. Are you already showing that same quality that you want to see in your children? Because you are the best. What you say versus what you do will always be more of a teachable experience, positive or negative, than what you say. And that's the case for all of us. Thinking back to our experiences and thinking about what we then go on to offer our children, they will always go with what they see you do over what you say. So that's so important to bear in mind. Number 4, boundaries. I don't think I hardly ever hear this discussed, but another important one is boundaries are a basic requirement within marriage. I'd recommend this book. I've been following this lady from therapist on Instagram, and I'm really excited to probably do it, but I already know it's going to be an amazing book. Set Boundaries, Find Peace, a guide to reclaiming yourself. And a quote from her book which says, whose standard am I trying to meet? Do I have the time to commit to this? What's the worst thing that could happen if I don't do this? How can I honor my boundaries in this situation? Every boundaries are just an area that will impact your marriage in a multitude of ways. You know, a lack of boundaries, or a lack of boundaries can often add fuel to the fire of frustrating situations. So say for example, we could be messaging someone after a certain time, for example, the opposite sex. It could be down to the time in terms of time you spend on your phone, for example, versus the quality time you spend with your spouse. It could be with your in-laws, boundaries that are in place in terms of whether they just choose to show up at the house uninvited, or, you know, so there's a few examples, but these are areas that need to be discussed and you need to be on the same page about within your marriage. So just a little bit more information for those where this may be the first time talking about this, but your marriage needs boundaries to function in a way that leaves you both feeling equally validated and respected. This was specifically focused on in-laws from one of my blog posts, but the examples I gave was, yeah, are you comfortable with your in-laws popping around at any moment of their choosing? How much is too much when having personal conversations? What happens when you feel as though your in-laws are still trying to parent your spouse and dictate their do's and don'ts? The list could go on, but any pressure points need to be discussed so that you have a united stance. Marriage without boundaries is like driving a car on a motorway without road markings. This is the way that I put it. You leave yourself entirely vulnerable to accidents that could have been avoided if you prioritize your ability to stay in your own lane. It's sometimes people, I think, confuse boundaries for rules within marriage, but it's not that at all. It's just having areas that where you are both on the same page, and it's important to say. And even if it's something that you say, I'm not comfortable with this. It's having that respect as a spouse to say, okay, I appreciate that. Within sex, for example, it might be, I don't feel, I'd rather that I'd rather this happen, or I'd rather that not happen. And it's when those boundaries are crossed, what then happens as a result for you to make sure you're upholding your boundaries. So as a couple, united, the stance that you take, if it's someone or something external to your marriage, and then within marriage, the approach that you take, if it's that either spouse is overstepping and not appreciating those boundaries. So yeah, this is an important area for discussion, but I think I definitely recommend getting that book just to see that the broad scope of boundaries, how they affect every aspect of your life, and ways that you can look to incorporate healthy boundaries into your marriage. So boundary basics, areas to consider. I've just given some examples here. In-laws and family. Personal privacy, for example, it might be not agreeing not to go through each other's phones, not being forced to share information. Communication, no tolerance for shouting or name calling. Autonomy, freedom to make decisions, work towards goals, maintain friendships. Physical space, no tolerance for violence. Money, not hiding money or debt. Home life, expectations, chores, relationship rules. So yeah, I noted these ones down, and I've just included the source at the bottom as an example, as the source as to where you can find out more if you would like to. This just goes on, so just give you a few more examples. So it says practical steps in terms of implementing boundaries. Use clear communication. Spend time identifying what is important to you in your relationship in your life. What hill are you willing to die on, and what are you willing to be more flexible about? So essentially, what is your hill? I would definitely not cross that line, and okay, we can kind of be working with this. And once you've identified your specific boundaries, use clear language when you're discussing them with your partner. So when it says consequences, again, this can sound almost like with a child, like if you do this, this will happen. But that shouldn't be the way that you look at it. It's just in your relationship, what happens if boundaries are crossed and boundaries aren't respected? Because this does happen, infidelity happens. And that's just one aspect, there are ways, it doesn't have to be sexually related. There are ways infidelity happens in so many different forms. It could just be the way that someone sees or has spoken to someone else about you as the spouse, that you just feel that they've completely disrespected you, or whatever it might be. And just that feeling of being betrayed, or lies, or mistrust, or whatever it might be, like anything that disrupts your trust is a sign of boundaries that are needed in some form. So this is important. And then lastly, take responsibility. Remember, everything that you do has a consequence, positive or negative, and realizing what you say and do or doesn't do affects your partner. Mistakes, as mentioned there, it's important to say mistakes, they may happen, it's not to say that this is, there's no room for error in this marriage. And it's not fair to look at marriage that way, because you're both human. but it's having clear, respectful communication so that you are both on the same page when it comes to your boundaries. Your marriage needs boundaries to function in a way that leaves you both feeling equally validated and respected. Again, important to say this because it's not for me to come and bash you over the head with my boundary and say that you should this and this and this and you know better in this. Like, we need to both be able to recognize, okay, that's your boundary. I may have crossed that. I respect you enough to say, to deal with the consequences and see how we can move forward, and vice versa. And go about it in a way that still leaves you feeling as a team working together. So on that topic, I use the example of social media, but as I say, there's so many aspects where boundaries are needed. But I'll give this example of social media because I know at the moment this is probably one of the number one things that many people struggle with in marriages. So we're in a social media era, but here's an example. So social media shouldn't manage you. You owe it to your marriage to address an issue that is treading on the toes of your quality time or causing division. It can be an uncomfortable conversation, but these are conversations that lead to the best kind of change. So 1, when you spend a lot of time on social media, I feel. 2, if less time was spent on social media, I feel we could. 3, the last time you spent quality time with me, I felt. 4, for us to get to a point where we are spending more time together, I feel we need to. And 5, I hope that we can work on addressing this issue between us so that we can feel. And this goes for anything. As I say, I just use social media as an example. It could just be generally time spent on someone's phone. It could be time spent, I don't know, watching films or playing games or speaking to other people, or in terms of the quality time and your feeling of, is that being honoured? There's so much. So this is just something that you can take and adapt how you choose, but hopefully it will just encourage you to have these kind of conversations within your marriage. And then lastly, the last area I wanted to touch on is vulnerability. And this is, I would say, the core of any healthy marriage. This is why so many marriages, unfortunately, do break down, because people just aren't willing to be vulnerable. And it's also a fear, that fear of being seen for who you really are. The fear of judgment, the fear of, if someone knows what you've really struggled with or what you've really done, or the type of person you really, really, really are. And vulnerability is just, it underpins everything. It underpins your ability to be, emotionally available for your spouse, which again is huge. If you can't be vulnerable to begin with, how are you going to connect or empathize with them if they're going through a particularly difficult time, or if they need you to be able to support them in depth in terms of how they're feeling? And it's something that, again, we don't often talk about, because by the fact of what vulnerability is and what it calls for, as I mentioned at the very beginning, in terms of me really married being born from my own challenges within my marriage, like, I knew that if I didn't find a way to voice what I was going through, I wouldn't be able to be vulnerable, because by definition of what vulnerability is, it requires you to be uncomfortable, to have the difficult conversations, and to be real, to be seen. And that takes a lot. But when you can do that within your marriage, and when you can truly show your spouse, like, you can share the worst and the best of you. So I'm really struggling with this right now. I'm dealing with this addiction and it's taking me to this point. I feel like this when I see these members, whoever of the opposite sex. I feel like, because I've struggled with this, and it's how you put words to how you feel in the first place. It's hard. I'll be honest with you. It's very uncomfortable. It's very it feels almost unnatural. But when you can push through that discomfort, it leads you to the place of freedom like you've never known, for you personally and for your marriage. And because it is the core of what your marriage requires, and because it's something that we definitely don't talk about, this is why we suffer. Because I shared this week, when, again, referring back to our Sexpectations talk, I shared that vulnerability is the core of sex. Core. And for those who are married, you would have experienced this and understand this, and maybe not fully grasp this, But we won't have healthy sex lives, let alone marriages, if we are not discovering vulnerability within our marriages. That's the bottom line. So this is another book recommendation. You'll hear me talk about Brene Brown a lot whenever I do any kind of presentations, because she's a vulnerability researcher, and her research in this area is powerful, and the lessons she shares and the practical advice. So this is one of her books, Daring Greatly: How the Courage to be Vulnerable Transforms the Way We Live, Love, Parent and Lead. 100% recommend. I can't recommend it enough. I had to go back through it and make notes again, but yeah, here's a quote that says, because true belonging only happens when we present our authentic, imperfect selves to the world. Our sense of belonging can never be greater than our level of self-acceptance. And there's also a TED talk that she's done called The Power of Vulnerability. And at the time I saw it, I think it had over 50 million views, but I'm sure it's well over that now. But yeah, go and check it out, because this is what you need to know and need to grasp if your marriage is going to go to the next level. This is super important. So one of my blog posts I wrote called The Power of an Emotional Man. It says, if a boy is taught that his emotions are a weakness long before he becomes a man, then forming a solid connection with his spouse in marriage will end up being a very real challenge. This is something that a lot of men are struggling with. They just aren't able to connect emotionally, be emotionally available, because that's just never something they were taught to begin with. So they're now at a point where they're trying to navigate that. So having these kind of conversations are super important to allow teachable moments for people to learn that actually, yeah, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one struggling with this. There are ways that I can actually start to build on this. And again, I'll reiterate, it takes work. It takes a lot of work. But if you're willing and you see the areas where the work are required, this is what creates great potential in your marriage for it to be able to grow into something else. So yeah, I just wanted to definitely wrap up on this topic, because I think it's, as I say, it's everything, not just in marriage, but within your life personally. If you can grasp vulnerability, it blows your concept of just life wide open. So yeah, do your digging. So let's get vulnerable. I included here, this is an extract from one of my posts again. It says, in the 8 years I've been in a relationship with Liam, 4 years dating, 4 years married. We've both shared many vulnerable experiences. And from my perspective, I've raised personal issues such as debt, insecurities about my faith, feeling, for example, that I didn't know enough compared to him, doubts about my career prospects, feeling as though no doors seem to be opening for me in terms of my career and the direction I wanted to go in, physical flaws in terms of self-confidence and how I see my body, how I see myself, issues that stem from my own childhood and my background and my trauma that had to be dealt with and continue to deal with. I've experienced childbirth, which is the height of vulnerability, going through that experience. And as I say, that's just naming a few real life examples. And so I share this to say that the life is full of experiences that call for vulnerability in order for you to manage in a healthy way. But we often struggle to embrace these moments because of how it makes us feel. But the ability to be vulnerable, and I'll reiterate this, it is a journey. We have to overcome that fear of disconnection, the fear that if I share this will somehow put this person off me or make me feel like I'm just an ugly person and can't be seen for who I really am. Like, we need to be accepted for who we are in order for us to develop a sense of stability within our own lives. So we need to overcome that shame, ultimately. Like, shame is the biggest enemy of vulnerability. So if the person you married truly loves you, that love won't be limited to just your good days. They'll be there for you when you're struggling, when you're at your weakest, and even when you feel completely broken. And I included an image there because one of the well-being journaling sessions that I do is all about vulnerability. As mentioned, it's called Total Vulnerability. I look at ways to find true strength through embracing vulnerability. So if that sounds like something you actually want to try and dig into more and understand yourself, I recommend going to pentherapy.co.uk, and you'll see there's 8 different sessions, but vulnerability is one of them. And yeah, it's powerful. Every time I run a session, I always get such powerful feedback, and it's super important Can't say it enough how important it is. So if we don't feel like we can be vulnerable with the person that we married, then we're missing out on all that marriage was actually intended to be. Vulnerability goals, these tips to keep in mind. These are from the interview Daring to be Vulnerable with Brene Brown. So recognize that facing vulnerability takes enormous courage. Take small steps like asking someone what they are thinking, and be proud of your bravery when you do. Let go of the constant worry about what other people think of you. Most people are focused on their own internal struggles, not you. Feeling overwhelmed? Focus your attention gently on your breath and the sensations before returning back to the task at hand. And don't worry about being perfect. In fact, don't even consider it. No one is perfect, and the more you hold yourself to an impossible ideal, the more easily you'll give up. Fear of what others think will keep you stuck in a place of inaction. Yeah, this is like fundamental for you to grasp within your marriage. You have to let go of what others think. You have to let go of the fear of others judging marriage, or feeling like, you know, oh, I thought that they were that couple, or you know, they're having a hard time, they need help. I mean, if I was still stuck on what others think, I wouldn't be in front of you sharing this presentation, I'll be honest with you. But God has brought me to a place in my life where I know that this is so important. Like he's given me so much to share, that I'm confident in him and what he will bring out through me, because of the fact that conversations just not being had. So he's kind of taken little old me and said, right, you're going to be the one to say it, you're going to be the one to share it. And yeah, and my focus is no longer on what others think, and it's now on what God thinks. And it's just such a important place to get to within your life, where you can be free to actually act and be intentional about what your marriage needs, not what you think others will think of what you're thinking, you know, but get to a point where you can free yourself of all of that and think, what does my marriage need right now? You know, what are we sitting on that we're not dealing with, that we need to actually talk about and address if our marriage is going to change and it's going to grow, because it won't change by not doing anything. And I think that's something that we miss. You know, we kind of by having these areas that we don't talk about, the things they don't tell you about marriage, we get married and we think that the way we were before marriage is a guarantee and it will just last because that's just us. Like, it takes so much work and so much intentional effort to keep building and keep growing. And one thing I've learned is marriage is always changing. You know, I'm not the person I was when I got married. Liam isn't the person he was when he got married. And if you don't keep up with the changes in your marriage and learn to adapt and grow together, your marriage will suffer for it. So you have to be willing to adapt and grow and be flexible with what your marriage can be and what it's becoming, for the health of your marriage in the long term. So my last pause and explore moment, if you have never been allowed the space to open up and recognize your vulnerability, this can feel like a difficult prospect. So the first step is to recognize if something is difficult and to seek appropriate help where possible to work through it. And to say, if that means considering counseling, then consider it. Have a read of the following questions to help you, again, explore. So number one, what did your upbringing teach you about vulnerability? Number two, looking back on past relationships or encounters with the opposite sex before marriage, how willing were you to open up and be vulnerable? Number three, on a scale of 1 to 10, how vulnerable are you towards your spouse right now? And why? And then 4, how do you deal with shame in your life? And 5, how do you deal with shame? How can you deal with shame more effectively together in your marriage? So just to summarize the 5 points, I hope, as I say, it's a chance for you to kind of go back over and do a bit more digging yourself. And it hasn't felt too rushed, but I just wanted to make sure that I covered as much as I could with these 5 key areas. So the areas of finances, sex, parenting, boundaries, vulnerability. Your finances are foundational. Sex is far from simple. Parenting is a constant priority. Boundaries are a basic requirement. True love requires vulnerability. And these are all areas, as I say, I didn't know anything about before marriage. Is basically what I shared with you today is a culmination of my experience within marriage and research that I've done. And yeah, I think it's just a testament really to how much we can teach you from your own journey if you're willing to be open to those lessons and open to that journey of growth. So yeah, let's keep building better marriages. That's the goal. And thank you for listening. I've included my handles and websites if you want to connect for Really Married and Pen Therapy below. But yeah, it's been amazing to have this opportunity to share with you all. And I hope that this is, as I said from the beginning, giving you an opportunity to get curious, go back. I recommend go back, discover those questions, discuss, take time over them. And I wish you all the best for your existing marriages, future marriages, and that we'll just have more open spaces for these kind of necessary conversations. So thank you so much for listening today.
Amen. Wow.
Well, thank you so much for like very eye-opening presentation. I think for me, it's one of those where you would think you've covered it all, and then what I just realized from the 5 sections that you were touching on is like there's a lot of talking in marriage that's involved. Even though I've been trying to do that, we've been doing that, you then realize maybe you're not talking enough. I feel like sometimes maybe we sort of wiggle our way through certain conversations because they're difficult to have. But my take home is to actually revisit those conversations, I guess, and actually talk more.
Definitely. I think communication was a thread that ran through every single one of those topics. And it sounds so cliche, but it is because communication is so key. I think for me, one of the things that you said that I thought was just like earth shattering, I could feel the ground shake from here, was when you said that church should be the hub for our conversations about sex. Like, amen, amen, amen. We really shouldn't be ashamed of sexual desires and should use the church to have those healthy and wholesome conversations, because sex is a gift from God. It's a blessing. He intended it to be a blessing. So we need to talk about how God intended it to be. So I thought that was deep. I thought that was really deep. We do have loads of questions coming through. Do you want to take the first one?
Yeah, sure. First question really is on sex. It says, what do you do when you are going through a period where you don't feel like having sex? What are some ways I can, or you can keep the bedroom romance alive in my marriage? What can I do?
And I think that this is why, as I say, these kind of conversations are so important, because you're not always going to want it's even periods where it happen. And I think the more that you can have that conversation with your spouse, first of all, to be able to say that this is how I feel, and to say it from a place of making sure, obviously, you're taking that fear of like, it's the fact I know, because I've done it myself as well, a place of on how an active life, you know, we kind of think as much as I start to, oh, can you still hear me?
We can, yeah. You're breaking up ever so slightly, but we can still catch what you're saying.
Oh, okay, lovely. Sorry about that. Yeah, I was saying that sometimes so much pressure that we place on.
I think we've lost Juliet there. Yeah, I think we've lost her. We're going to give her a moment to hopefully sign back on and rejoin. But we're getting some really, really good interaction from our online audience. Hey, Juliet.
I was double trying it. Not today. Because it's such a juicy conversation. He's like, right, cut. Yeah, so right, sorry. So the fact is that because we place so much pressure on sex within the relationship as like being something that we judge a lot of our relationship by it. If we're not having sex, there's a problem, you know, especially if your love language is physical touch. But there are so many contributing factors. Like the way that I look at it is sex is always influenced by every other dynamic in your relationship. So if for whatever reason you're not feeling right now that I want to be having sex, it's important to look at what else is happening right now that might be also throwing that off balance. So it could be, it might even just be within you personally, like something you're experiencing hormonally or something that you're just, you know, you're being challenged with, or it might be something that's happening work-wise that's adding additional stress. It could be, if you're a parent, like something that's going on with the children, or it might be, I don't know, if for example, you've got to a point where you feel like your sex life is very routine and you just want something more spontaneous and to mix it up. So I think you have to get to the root of like, how do I feel that might be, you know, contributing to this lack of desire, and then have that conversation with your spouse to let them know, you know, this is not that, of course, like I don't have any less of a desire towards you. And even if you do, that's also a conversation that needs to be had. Like, okay, what's changed between you and your spouse that's maybe shifted that you feeling that they are still desirable towards you? And all of these potentially awkward conversations are important, because like I know you said at the beginning, and some people might have cringed when you're talking about poo conversations, but it's the fact when you get that comfortable with someone to be able to, and that's such an important indicator of being able to then build vulnerability. Because when you can say, okay, right now, for example, I'd love for us to have sex tonight, but so I found a lump down there, for example, or this is like really concerning for me, or, you know, our day has just been intense and I don't really feel like I want to have sex tonight, or having those kind of conversations to just keep it real. Because the more that you're able to do that and say like, this is how I feel, is it basically just expressing this is how I feel, that will start to allow you to be more open with one another and for your dynamic to be more fluid. And I guess, of course, like if there's a case where there's more going on and you want to maybe find out, why don't I have this desire, explore that. Don't just stay in a place where you're saying, I just don't want to have sex, I don't want to have sex, you know. And as I touched on in the presentation, if it's going deeper than just the occasion that you feel like you're not in the mood, explore that and get the help that you need, because sometimes it's even subconscious, you know, it's coming from things that we've experienced in the past, or even something that's triggering us. But if we stay in a place of saying, I just don't know, like, hold on, I just don't know what to do, that doesn't help your marriage. So it's having that ability to look at where you're at and say, okay, this isn't working right now, or I'm not in the mood, or, you know. But in all things, just be honest. Tell your spouse how you feel. Tell your spouse what you know right now, and know that if your relationship is one that allows for vulnerability and you're building on that, they're not going to feel any angrier towards you because you're not, you know, you're not available. If anything, that will help, because they recognize, okay, they're not feeling it this evening, but I respect that because they've explained to me and they've said how they're feeling. And at the end of the day, we're human, you know, so we need to be able to have that open conversation and know that marriage isn't somewhere that sex is always going to be happening. And it's a place to understand that just because sex doesn't happen doesn't mean the end of your marriage. It's understanding what is maybe impacting that one aspect of our marriage. How can we build and grow in that area? So yeah, just having that curiosity to understand.
Amen. Amen. I'm going to move it along to the next question, which is about children.
Okay.
So this question says, we recently had our first child and have been struggling to keep the marriage alive since. What practical steps can we take to keep our marriage strong while raising our child? And what challenges can we expect to meet along the way?
Yeah, that's a good one, because again, like, this is just what we don't talk about. So it's recognizing that it's natural to be in a position where your child, the demands are like 110%, because this newborn child needs so much from you constantly, and you are their source of survival. You know, so first of all, expect that it's going to be intense and that it's going to be constant. And a lot of people kind of look back on the newborn stage and kind of like, ooh, kind of cringe a bit, because they just know that it is a very, very tough time. But I would say, there's a blog actually I wrote, so go to be married, but there's a blog that I wrote called five survival tips for new parents, where I go into a lot of detail about this. But some of what I say in there is like, make sure you're checking in with each other. Make sure you're saying to one another, even if it's the end of the day, even if you're both just ready to drop, just kind of saying, okay, like what do you, how can I better help you? You know, I know that the dynamics are different in every marriage, but it's so important to try and be a team. You know, it's so important for mum to not end up being the one that's just doing everything and, you know, just about hanging in there. And you have to be able to express, okay, I need you to, for example, okay, you take little one and I'll just get a bit of sleep. Or, you know, can you sort this for tomorrow? Can you prep, like meal prep? Or can you do this? Or have these conversations so that you're more in sync with one another. And if you do need that help that you're not getting, it's finding ways that you can better navigate that together. Because it's recognizing that, as I say, this time no one kind of sails through it and just kind of says, oh, you know, we just like did everything to get it just happen. And there are people, as I say, their dynamic shifts, and it stays at a point of disconnect throughout their period of being parents, and they struggle to get that back. So I think the more that you can implement from the outset to find ways to navigate this test together, because of course, like when you're sleep deprived, or whether you're not, or whatever your dynamic is, like you'll be tested in a multitude of ways. So when you can kind of come, just always think, we should be a team in this. And if you don't feel like you're a team, have that conversation to say, right now, I feel like, and as I say, it always comes back to I feel, because it shouldn't be you should, or you are not, or you are, and you know, and naturally the other will go on the defensive. So when you can kind of approach and say, I feel, and it would help me if, and even switch it back and say, how can I help you in this situation? Like, the more you are aware of one another and kind of being real, if you're like, you know what, I don't even want to get out of bed today, or I feel like I'm just tearing my hair out and I don't know what, you know, I'm just about keeping this child alive, you know, to be real, be open, and like embrace the challenge together. And that will only make it easier in the long run, because trust me, it does get easier because you find your rhythm. But the more you can implement those things early on is the better, because then, as I say, as your child continues to grow, they recognize, oh, dad is there to equally be there for me just as much as mum. You know, like I have mum and dad, and I know that I can just as much, like I know in my marriage, that was super important for me, was to feel like I can leave an eye with Liam and I don't even have a second thought. You know, I'm not thinking like, oh, is he doing this for her, and will he remember this to her, and will he do, you know, I'm like, as dad, he should be able to just crack on and do what he needs to do for her and know her routine and know what she needs, same way I do as mum. And the temptation sometimes as mums is to step in and kind of be like, I will, or dad will come and ask you questions, and then you'll say, oh, let me just do it for you because I know, you know. But the more you can keep that respect for them as dad, just as much as you as mum, that will lighten your load as well, because it shouldn't be that you're carrying everything and, you know, you are the parent when you're in a marriage together. You know, there's two of you.
Yeah, so true.
It seems once the child comes, all the parents, the combined focus will be on the child. As you say, you need to keep the child alive, right? How can we balance achieving personal goals or priorities without undermining our responsibility to take care of our child?
Another blog post is your career versus your child. Check that one out. I feel like you got a blog post. Yeah, whip them out. But no, honestly, because it's hard. Like, all of these areas are super important to talk about, but again, from experience, it's not easy, because I remember like I was going through that period where I wasn't working and looking after Anaya, and I said, like, she's my priority. I will not work. She will have what she needs from me, and you know, we'll just make it work otherwise. You know, but then it got to a point where I started to feel like I also need that fulfillment. You know, feeling like. And as I say, everyone's different. Some people are happy just being, when I say just, some people are happy as a stay-at-home mum or a stay-at-home dad, and that's they have no desire to go out and work or, you know, any kind of career. They're happy with their role, and that's fine, that's completely fine. But there are also parents who maybe were working beforehand and have that desire afterwards, or even maybe weren't working beforehand, but they want to pursue something, as you say, some kind of goal or whatever it may be. And so it's important to then talk to your spouse and say, like, this is what we're aiming towards. Like, have the conversation with your spouse, talk to and say, like, I would like to, and what does that look like? Because again, touching on the financial aspect, that's something that you have to kind of bear in mind and consider. So for me, I went a period where I wasn't working, and then once I then was working, I found a role where I was able to be flexible. So that was really helpful for me, because I was in a certain amount of days, which meant that I could leave an eye with their grandma. But then I was always saying, even when I was working, I was like, if I need to go for whatever reason to sort her, I need that freedom and that flexibility. So before I even took on the job, I was like, these are what I need. And so what you need to have in mind is any kind of goal, whether it's business, whether it's work, whether it's career, whatever that looks like, shape it to what you want it to be and what you need. Because what often happens is people will go and think, I just want to work, I just want a job. And when they're approaching that job or that employer, they don't go to the employer thinking, but what am I bringing to you and what are you offering me? You know, they go thinking, oh, I just want to be chosen, you know, I just want to be like selected for whatever reason to be able to yeah. And so yeah, pick me. Whereas I think it's so important for you to go in with that confidence to kind of say, right, my child is my priority. And as you said, it seems like everything is on the child, but you are just as much a priority. You yourself as a parent, like, you need to tell yourself that I am a priority, same way like my spouse is a priority. And as I said, like, there's 3 things that you need to list every day. Prioritize time with your spouse, time with yourself, time with your children. 3 things, not one, not, you know, the children and no one else, or the spouse and no one else. And as I say, it's a juggling act. It takes it's work, but when you navigate that, you'll find that you get to a point of fulfillment. Because if I wouldn't be doing what I was doing if I didn't have that approach. You know, I wouldn't be able to be running the ministry or have this business or, you know, work as well and be going to do my master's. Like, there's no way if I didn't have that attitude to kind of say, okay, let me talk to Liam, see how we can work this and navigate this and work towards these goals. Because we have a 2-year-old, and in everything that I'm doing, yes, I love all that I do, but I'm always thinking, okay, but with her, how are we going to work around? So what often, even during the pandemic, we'd be working around each other. So my hours would be a certain time. Liam would start work early, then I'd start work at a certain time. Then when I didn't have her, he'd have her. And, you know, we're kind of like juggling together, but it's finding ways together. How can we make this work and navigate it for the favor of both of us and our goals? Because the last thing you want to do is just throw your goals out the window, because that's not a quality of life. But at the same time, communicate your goals. Don't expect your spouse to understand when you say, I want to go for that promotion because I want to support you and our home. Because sometimes what it ends up, where, as I say, someone's doing the responsibility and I hope you can still hear me, because my connection's a bit choppy, but
yeah, it's coming through.
I hope you got the gist of what I was saying.
We did. And then the last couple of questions are around boundaries. And questions around boundaries were coming through thick and fast. And one of them is asking, so this is somebody who was listening to the presentation and says, you know, but what does it say about our marriage if I'm not able to share my personal phone with my husband or my wife?
And you know what? I knew that this was something that someone was going to jump on. I knew it. I was waiting for it. I was like, because, okay, when I'm giving these examples, it's an example. It's not saying that that is what you have to implement in your marriage. Your marriage is unique to you, and that's fine. There are some people that will say, like, privacy is important. Like, it's important for that to be respected within our marriage. So it shouldn't feel, I shouldn't feel like I need to look at what you're doing. You shouldn't feel like you need to look at what I'm doing, because then where is trust in there? Like, we should be able to just appreciate we are two grown adults and have that element of trust for us to be independent adults, even though we're married. And that's not, you know, and some people will say, if you're looking for something, you'll find it, you know, like, you should be able to have that trust. That's one aspect. Then you'll also get people that will say, like, we should just be, everything should be open, access, everything should be accessible, nothing to hide, all honesty. You know, if I want to check through your phone and see who you've been messaging, what you're doing, I should be, I even saw someone talking about they referred to it as a phone drop test, where any they can come and say, put your phone down, and then just literally look through your phone, and vice versa. And they say that's been good for their marriage because it's meant that they just know at any point their spouse look at what they're doing, so it makes them accountable. And I'm not saying one is right and one is wrong, but what I'm saying is, like, you need to recognize what your marriage needs, you know, and appreciate that. And I think this is a super important point, which is why I thought, as I say, I was waiting for someone to raise it. It's because what looks right for someone in their marriage may not look right for someone else in theirs. And the dynamic is completely, you know, for some people, there are issues from the outset, and they feel like by seeing what you're doing, this is helping our trust. Some people believe that, but there are also people that believe that I shouldn't need to keep checking up. I should have my peace of mind, and I should be able to know that you are in this for the right reasons. I am in this for the reasons. That's okay too. But ultimately, it's for you to decide what works best for your marriage. It's for you to decide if we're looking through one another's phone and this is adding actual additional tension to our marriage, why is that? You know, if we're looking through one another's phone, it's no issue, we're so chilled about it, we're fine, that's for you to kind of look at together as well. Like, just know that we need to pull away from this idea of kind of comparing and saying it's a one size fits all for every marriage, because it really isn't. And as I say, what works for you won't necessarily work for the next one, but it's okay for you to decide together, what do our boundaries need to be? And whether it's the phone or whether it isn't, what do our boundaries need to be? And just keep it between the both of you in your relationship. And don't, as I said in the vulnerability part, throw away what do other people think. What do you think? You know, what does your spouse think? And if you are aligned in your thinking and you're happy with your decision, then by all means go ahead. But just make sure that you are both, you know, coming together in your thinking, rather than you comparing to what other couples maybe do. I'm not saying that's what this particular person is doing, but there's a tendency to often do that when we hear what other couples are doing, and we think, oh, well, maybe I don't trust my spouse if I'm not doing that. No, do what you need to do for your marriage, and keep building on that.
Thank you. Another one on boundaries. What role will your in-laws likely play in your marriage, especially in some cultures where going against their wishes is seen as a disgrace? That's disgracing them.
Yeah, it's huge. Like, in-laws is a huge topic. Again, another blog post that I've written, but it's everything, because the fact is, before you get married, you know, you are having some kind of a relationship, or maybe not, with your in-laws. And so it's recognizing that after you get married, they don't just go away, you know, like they are they are connected directly to your spouse, and they have shaped your spouse to become the person that they are today. So regardless of whether you get on with them or not, there has to be an element of respect there for who they are to your spouse. But I think it's important for you to have these, as I say, have transparency, because when it comes to what your marriage is, regardless of cultures, regardless of expectations, it is your marriage. And sometimes that is something that, as I say, culturally, I can see definitely how this can tread on toes, because especially when it's a different generation, different thinking, different, you know, just different traditions, different things that you're willing to do in terms of your marriage and how you want to shape that, what that looks like. You should be allowed to form your marriage in terms of what you both want it to be. Like, marriage, when you enter into it, is basically a clean slate. And when you see it like that, it's such a freeing perspective, because when you can get rid of, oh, I was expected to do this, and I was told to do this, and I was told a wife should be this, and I was told a husband should do this, and I was told, it's heavy stuff to go into marriage with all of that thinking, and then try to then shape that into what what you think the other person wants from you, and unfortunately, that's what I think becomes a thorn in a lot of marriages, because of the fact that people can't let go of other people's expectations, other people's kind of whatever it may be. And with in-laws, it's a particularly sensitive area, because it's not something that you can just decide, what they say doesn't matter, but then again, you can't go so far as the other way, is to say, I will do whatever you say at the expense of your marriage. And so having conversations about this are important, where you instill those boundaries together and collectively to say, okay, this is how I feel when your mum talks to me like that, or this is how I feel when we go into family gatherings and this is how they communicate with us, or this is how I feel when we had our first child and the way your family were, and I didn't feel like we necessarily had time for us to bond together as a family, but it was pretty much like, you will do this and this is how you do it. Having those conversations will then give you a chance to have those hard conversations. And what I will always say is, it should not be you that's dealing with the stuff to do with your spouse's family. It should never be that you are the one to go and try to undo whatever is going on. Like, it should be coming from your spouse directly to their family if there's any particular issues that need to be resolved. Because what often happens is that when you come and you have any kind of, even though you could have the best intentions in the world, if your spouse is not there with you, or they're not the one going, and it's not so you can't speak to them, but be a united front. If it doesn't seem like you're a united front, then already you're just adding more fuel to the fire. And so it's important for even your spouse might be fearful of having certain conversations because of things like respect culturally and how you are seen. And even though you might be married and grown, you're still the child. That's how, a lot of people struggle with that kind of, how do I come across as an adult when I'm just not seeing it, as I don't have that place. And so it's finding, as I say, between the both of you, because at the end of the day, once the door is closed, it's just you two, so you get to decide, what does this look like? How do we then navigate this together? And sometimes it is, unfortunately, an ongoing issue with in-laws. But if you can come together and be united, then it's much likely that you're going to take steps in a better direction with them. Because ultimately, when they see you're united, when they see that it's not like me versus you or him versus them or whatever, they're much more likely to warm to your dynamic and what it looks like, because they recognize, okay, this is them together, and they're forming a united front. But it's also important for me to say that this also will take time. This is something that doesn't just happen overnight, and you have to build those relationships. So even though it might be difficult from the outset, like, try your best to understand where they are and where they're coming from and who your in-laws are. And just, as I say, have that appreciation for them as your spouse's family. Because when that underpins everything, like, you're much less likely to take offense or to, as I say, take it personally, because you realize that, unfortunately, we don't choose our family are like our family, but when we can actually appreciate the differences and recognize that even though that's your family, we now are our own family unit. We now are our own, marital unit. And what this looks like is down to us exclusively. Adopting that mindset is so, so important for the marriage you then go on to have. And as I say, not even just your marriage, but the mindset your kids grow up with and the marriages they go on to have. So if it's going to change, it needs to happen now, and between the both of you, in terms of how you navigate these kind of areas.
Yeah, definitely. And we are running out of time, but we do only have one question left. So I would feel bad to leave off one person's question. And this final question is just around personal boundaries. And the question is, what if my partner is using personal boundaries as an excuse not to disclose items from their past that are affecting our marriage?
Sorry, I missed the very first bit of the question. Could you repeat that again?
No problem. It says, what if my partner is using personal boundaries as an excuse not to disclose items from their past that are affecting our marriage?
I think, as I say, with anything like this, like it's always going to be super sensitive. And I think that if it's affecting your marriage, it's not something you can ignore. If it was them, that they were dealing with something themselves and they were saying like, for whatever reason, I feel like I'm not ready to talk about this right now, so I need to work through this, is one thing. But if it's directly impacting you both and your marriage, then that is something that has to be explored, but it's how you explore it. So it's not saying that you kind of pin them down and say like, you need to tell me everything, like you're obligated to now that you're married to me. Like that's not something that you can do with the sensitive issues. But it's saying like, and to be fair, that's even where you can implement your own boundaries, because it feels like you are not progressing and changing, and your marriage has basically hit stalemate. Then that's often the perfect position basically to consider, okay, well, let's maybe look at some outside help to encourage you to work through what you're dealing with. The hard stuff that you're dealing with personally. And that's where a third party can be really helpful, to have someone to actually go and talk to, and to say like, aside from your spouse, to say like, this is what I'm struggling with, this is what I'm dealing with. And like, as I say, I can't recommend that enough. Both myself and my husband would say the same. We've been separately and we've been together for counselling. Like, it's important to have those external sources of and as I say, it doesn't even have to be counselling, is obviously the ideal, but if it's just, for example, a trusted friend that you can speak to and kind of say like, this is a struggle I'm facing and how do I navigate. But you have to be intentional, and this is the thing, this is the hard part, and this was the hard truth to swallow, is that I can't choose for Liam, same way Liam can't choose for me. That I can't make him get help, I can't make him want to try, same way he can't do that for me. So all you can do is encourage that person and say, okay, I really think you should maybe see someone, or I really think that you should maybe like try to find intentional ways to look at what you're going through, so that you can come and feed back to me, so that we can start taking steps forward. It can't be something that you force in any kind of way. Like you can't make anyone do anything that they don't want to do. And so it's just you being and encouraging them, a loving way, kind of saying like, right now, because we're not dealing with this, I feel like our marriage is stuck. I feel like we're not really going anywhere, and I feel like it's upsetting for this to be something that is coming between us. Like, we need to find a way to work to move forwards. And so it's then you kind of giving that person an olive branch to kind of go to say like, we need to work on this, like basically, can you try? And ultimately it will have to come to a point where are you okay with the person not trying? Like, can you basically stay in a position where someone is not trying? Because that's not healthy, and that's not realistic. So you can only kind of, as I say, take those steps. And if it's something you need to revisit, try and revisit it, like give it time and then revisit it to kind of say, okay, where are we at? What can we do? But as I say, anything that is coming between you and is a thorn in your marriage, you have to be super sensitive about it. But don't just cover it over. Recognize like, we need to address this, otherwise this will turn into something bigger than what we want it to be. But in all things, as I say, like, recognize you can't force anything, you can't make anyone do anything. So all you can do is kind of try to encourage out of love and be there. And then just hope that they will see, like, if we're going to go anywhere in our marriage, if we're going to build on, if we're going to get past this, I need to take the steps. I need to, because marriage is so dependent on that. It's dependent on the person looking at themselves and saying, actually, I need to do this, and vice versa. Like, if you're not going to do that, then your marriage, unfortunately, it will just stay exactly where it is at this point. Because you have to both be willing, you have to both want to work and want to try. So yeah, it's doing that digging and recognizing that, the way I put it is that often things are symptoms of something else. So it might be that initial symptom of something that he's saying, or he or she or whoever is kind of like, this is a boundary, I don't want to talk about it. This is, okay, but why don't I want to talk about it? why is this triggering to them? Why is this something that is a repetitive issue? Why is this something that, you know, maybe you haven't seen it before? Why is this something that's come up now in your marriage? Why is this, and as I say, having that curiosity, asking those questions, and if you need to, also getting the help that you need. But yeah, I obviously wish you the best, and I know it's not easy, but it's having that kind of patience, and of course, like I haven't said it, but I will say it, to just kind of say prayer is always prayer is so paramount for your marriage and for the health of your marriage. And I can't, you know, if I could have said like things we don't really talk about, it could have been like even before anything else I mentioned, because we kind of hear prayer and it's in one ear and out the other. But I've just experienced the most incredible outcomes as a result of taking that time to kind of be intentional, get down on my knees and pray for my husband, pray for my marriage, pray for me, because the enemy is just go, like, literally, he's like, and his marriages are his number one target, because he knows if he gets that, he gets the family. And so have that time with you and God to kind of pour your heart out, because God wants nothing but the best for you and your husband and any children, if you have children. So
thank you so much. Thank you so much, Juliet, for spending time with us today and sharing what I believe maybe God has given you. And we just appreciate your ministry and pray that God continues to open more doors for your ministry, to reach out more people, young couples, married, unmarried, those who've been in it for a while. And for those who are watching, if you can really check out her Instagram page, Really Married, the blog and the pen therapy, as well as if you got a little bit of cash, support her as well by getting a book on Amazon for Failing in Love. I would like to take this opportunity to ask Pastor Ramdin to close for us in prayer, if you are there. Okay.
you're hiding.
Well, let us pray. Dear Father, thank you so much for this session that we just had. Thank you for Juliet Sweeney and what she's presented. We thank you for the message that she had and some of the questions that is answered, and hopefully they may be able to help those who have been listening, and for those who will be playing back to watch and to catch up. Lord, I ask that you may continue to speak to them, speak to their hearts, so that we may all grow in our marriages, and those who may be planning on getting married, so that they might get an insight to the details that will really help them get their marriage going. Praying for their family, that you might continue to bless them. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen, guys.
Thank you so much. And we shall see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
God willing.